Okay, let's try and unpack this. This deep dive takes us into a pretty intense recent period reported in the ongoing conflict. We're drawing on a stack of sources you showed here, and they really paint a picture of, well, escalating attacks from both sides. And they describe the impact this is reportedly having on civilians and, the prospects for peace.
Yeah, it's quite a lot to sift through.
Definitely. So our mission today is really to zero in on the most important insights these accounts offer, specifically understanding the reported pattern of action and reaction described right here in these materials without bringing in anything, from outside.
Okay, sounds good. And what's fascinating right at the top is how these reports document a series of recent actions attributed to Ukraine against Russian territory.
Right.
The sources detailed drone attacks on military airfields, the collapse of 2 bridges, which apparently led to railway disasters, casualties reported there, and even attacks on civilian structures like a school, a cultural center. One account specifically mentions a HIMARS strike, that's a rocket system, reportedly hitting residential buildings, said it killed 2 women. There's also damage to a railway and the targeting of the Crimean Bridge noted in these materials.
And how did the sources say Russia framed those events, or, their response to them?
Well, according to one source here, the Russian Ministry of Defense explicitly stated that a massive strike they conducted overnight was, quote, in response to the terrorist acts of the Kiev regime.
Okay, that's strong language.
It is. And it's important to note that phrase, Kiev regime, is the language used by Russia in these sources when they refer to the Ukrainian government. These reports say Russia claimed its stated targets were Ukrainian military infrastructure, things like design offices, manufacturing workshops, drone assembly places, training centers, weapon depots.
So military targets, officially.
Officially, using high-precision, long-range weapons and drones. That's what they claimed.
That framing is pretty stark, isn't it? One source even quotes President Putin questioning negotiation with those who, as he reportedly put it, choose terror.
Yeah, and saying the Kiev regime is gradually degenerating into a terrorist organization and that its sponsors become accomplices of terrorists.
So that's the justification presented in these sources for the scale of their response.
Exactly. It sets out their reported rationale for that large-scale attack which followed.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, because these sources also give us Ukraine's perspective on that big Russian attack, and importantly, their view on their own actions that came before it.
Right.
What did these reports say about the scale and impact of those Russian strikes from the Ukrainian side?
Well, according to the Ukrainian sources cited here, the Russian attack was indeed massive. President Zelensky is quoted describing it as using over 400 drones and 40 missiles.
400 drones? Wow.
Yeah, hitting almost all of Ukraine, it says, across multiple regions. The reported casualties from Ukraine included 3 firefighters in Kyiv, 2 civilians in Lutsk, 1 person in Chernihiv, among others, dozens injured. And while Russia claimed military targets, these reports note widespread damage. They specifically mention apartment buildings and other non-military sites were observed struck. And they say this fits a pattern described for Russian attacks throughout the conflict.
And Ukraine's foreign minister, according to these reports, stated Russia responded to its destroyed aircraft by, quote, attacking civilians. Again, very direct language.
Very direct.
And the sources mention Ukraine's general staff saying they launched overnight strikes on 2 Russian airfields, claiming they targeted planes Russia uses for missile strikes on Ukrainian cities and, civilians.
Right, turning the justification back around.
Exactly. They also claimed an earlier operation had hit a significant portion of Russia's strategic bombers. So you see this immediate counterclaim and stated rationale from the Ukrainian side too. It's quite the back and forth.
Absolutely. And if we try and connect this to the broader picture these sources present, we see these reciprocal actions continuing. Russia's defense ministry, for instance, claimed to have intercepted 174 Ukrainian drones over multiple regions inside Russia.
174?
Yeah, and 3 Ukrainian Neptune missiles over the Black Sea. Meanwhile, Ukraine, as we just said, reported striking those Russian airfields.
And all of this is happening, the reports say, against the backdrop of stalled peace talks. Is that right?
That's what they indicate. The sources mention recent U.S.-led diplomatic efforts, apparently 2 rounds of direct talks, but yielding no major breakthroughs. The sides reportedly remain far apart. Ukraine's offer of a ceasefire in a presidential meeting is noted. But alongside that, the Kremlin's reported effective rejection of a truce and, lack of concessions.
So not much movement there.
Seems not. One source quotes the Institute for the Study of War, assessing that the Kremlin continues efforts to falsely portray Russia as willing to engage in good faith negotiations, despite refusing concessions.
And President Zelensky is quoted in these materials saying, pretty pointedly, Russia doesn't change its stripes.
Yeah, captures the reported sentiment.
These sources also bring in some interesting external reactions. There's that detail about U.S. President Trump's call with Putin.
Oh, right. Where, according to Trump, Putin said he'd be forced to respond to attacks on airfields.
And Trump later apparently added the response, won't be pretty.
Yes. And one source points out that Trump didn't urge Putin to temper his response. It quotes a Ukrainian lawmaker criticizing this, specifically regarding strikes on civilians.
Interesting detail.
And the reports also mention Trump's subsequent analogy, comparing the conflict to letting children fight for a while before intervening. One source interprets that as possibly signaling a more hands-off approach, maybe dampening hopes for peace.
It's a complex web of actions and reactions, isn't it? And amidst all these strategic moves and claims, these sources also remind us of the human impact. Like that reported experience of a 14-year-old in Kiev sheltering with her family after an explosion blew off a window, describing a panic attack, just the shock of being alive.
Yeah, that kind of detail really brings home the lived reality described in these accounts beyond the military claims.
So, stepping back, what does all this from these sources seem to suggest? We've seen, well, a described cycle of action and reaction, tit for tat almost,
Pretty much, yeah.
with significant reported consequences for civilians and a clear impact on peace talks, which, as you said, these reports indicate remain stalled, sides far apart.
It's a complex picture, just based on these materials alone, each side presenting their justification for strikes, reporting attacks against their own territory.
Right, so this raises an important question, drawing purely from these dynamics described here. Given this reported pattern of escalation and these differing narratives we've just talked about, what does this suggest about the immediate path forward, for de-escalation or negotiation based purely on what's in these accounts?